In the heart of the Everglades in Florida, where the sky meets crystal clear waters in an infinite horizon, Michael Sanders drove his Jeep along a dirt road. A dedicated biologist and wildlife researcher, he had left behind a promising career in New York to follow his true calling, protecting America's wildlife. The sun was beginning to set when he spotted the small lodge that would be his home for the coming months. "Blue Jay Lodge," said the rustic wooden sign, swaying gently in the evening breeze. Helen Miller, the owner, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and a welcoming smile, was waiting for him on the porch. "Welcome to our little piece of paradise," she said, as she served freshly brewed coffee. "It's simple here, but it's from the heart." Michael smiled, feeling instantly at home with that warm reception. What he didn't know was that this place held far more mysteries and stories than its wooden walls revealed. During dinner, Helen began to talk about the changes the Everglades had been facing. "It used to be all beauty around here. Now some people don't respect nature anymore," she sighed, looking out the window. "My daughter Claire is always arguing with some neighbors because of this." As if summoned, Claire appeared in the kitchen doorway. At 28, with intense green eyes and a strong personality, she was known in the region for her work as a veterinarian and tireless defender of local wildlife. When she saw Michael, something in her gaze changed, a mixture of curiosity and mistrust. "So, you're the biologist from New York?" she asked, sitting down at the table. "You came to study the Florida panthers?" Michael nodded, realizing there was much more to that question than it appeared. Claire exchanged a significant look with her mother before continuing, "We need to talk about some things that have been happening around here." The next morning, Michael began his fieldwork. Equipped with cameras and tracking equipment, he ventured into the dense Everglades vegetation. That's when he met Anthony, an old fisherman who had lived on the riverbanks for over 50 years. The man, his face weathered by time and eyes that seemed to hold all the secrets of those lands, gave a warning that would change the course of his research. "Son, there's something wrong going on here. The panthers, they're disappearing. And it's not just because of nature," Anthony whispered, looking nervously from side to side. "There are big people involved, people who don't want anyone sticking their nose where it doesn't belong." Meanwhile, in the nearest town, Robert Morrison, an influential agribusiness entrepreneur, was presiding over a tense meeting in his luxurious office. "We can't let this biologist interfere with our plans," he was telling his associates. "The farm expansion project cannot stop." What no one knew was that Julia, Robert's daughter and Claire's best friend since childhood, was listening to the conversation behind the door, her heart torn between loyalty to her family and her love for the nature she had grown up admiring alongside her friend. At night, when Michael returned to the lodge, he found a mysterious note in his room. "Not everything is as it seems in the Everglades. Be careful with the questions you ask. Some secrets are too dangerous to be revealed." The note wasn't signed, but with it was an old photo of a family in front of the lodge, dated 20 years ago. In the photo, besides a younger Helen, there was a man he didn't know, but who had the same intense green eyes as Claire. On the back of the photograph, a faded inscription read, "Miller Family. The true story of the Everglades is yet to be told." That night, as the Everglades fell asleep under a starry sky, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled upon something much bigger than a simple research on Florida panthers. Between the mystery of the note, Claire's suspicious looks, and Anthony's enigmatic words, one thing was certain. His life in the Everglades would be very different from what he had imagined. The next morning, Claire found Michael analyzing the old photograph on the lodge's porch. Her face hardened when she recognized the image. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Michael explained about the mysterious note, and for the first time he saw Claire's mask of toughness begin to crack. "That's my father, Frank Miller," she revealed, sitting down next to him. He was a biologist too, dedicated his life to preserving the Everglades. Her eyes got lost in the landscape as she continued. 15 years ago, he simply disappeared during an expedition. Many say it was an accident, but the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Julia Morrison, who appeared in her luxurious pickup truck, raising dust on the road. Seeing Claire and Michael together, something in her gaze betrayed concern. "Claire, we need to talk," she said, giving her friend a significant look. In his office in town, Robert Morrison was receiving a visit from George Sanders, an influential politician in the region. "The problem isn't just the biologist," George was saying, running his hands through his graying hair. "It's Helen's daughter. That girl is starting to ask the same questions her father was asking." Meanwhile, at the lodge, Anthony arrived in a hurry, carrying an old diary. "I found this buried near my house," he explained to Michael. "It belonged to Frank. There are things in here that a lot of important people don't want to come to light." Helen, observing everything from afar, felt the weight of memories. That night, alone in her room, she removed a dusty box from the back of the wardrobe. Inside it, old letters revealed a story of love and idealism between her and Frank, but they also contained warnings about threats and disturbing discoveries about the true fate of the Everglades lands. The next day, Michael and Claire decided to investigate a remote area of the Everglades, following coordinates found in Frank's diary. During the expedition, they found old markings on trees and traces of an abandoned camp. "My father used to say that the Everglades hold secrets in its waters," Claire murmured, touching one of the markings. Julia, torn between her loyalties, decided to seek answers on her own. In a locked room in the Morrison mansion, she found old documents linking her father to a controversial project from 15 years ago, exactly at the time of Frank's disappearance. In town, a young journalist named Peter Adams began making dangerous connections. His investigations into environmental irregularities in the region led him to discover a network of influences that extended far beyond the Everglades. When he tried to publish his first article, he received a clear warning: some stories should remain submerged. Back at the lodge, Michael found Helen crying over old photographs. "There's something you need to know," she said, wiping away tears. "Frank didn't disappear by accident. He discovered something big. And now, seeing you and Claire following the same steps." That night, during a typical Everglades storm, Claire found Michael in his research room. "We need to talk," she said, soaked by the rain. "I think I know why my father disappeared, and if we're not careful, we might meet the same fate." The storm was increasing outside, but inside the lodge, an even bigger storm was forming. The discoveries in Frank's diary, the documents found by Julia, Peter's investigations, and the secrets kept by Helen were beginning to form a frightening puzzle. The Everglades, majestic and mysterious, held in its murky waters much more than stories of love and preservation. It held truths that could forever change the fate of all involved. Claire led Michael to an old shed behind the lodge, illuminated only by the flickering light of a lantern. Among dusty boxes and abandoned equipment, she revealed a detailed map of the Everglades, marked with notes in her father's handwriting. "Frank discovered that several springs were being secretly diverted," Claire explained, her fingers tracing lines on the map. "But it wasn't just that. He found evidence of a much larger project, something that would change the entire balance of the ecosystem." At the Morrison mansion, Julia was facing her own internal battle. In a secret drawer in her father's office, she found old contracts with foreign companies and tampered environmental impact studies. Among the documents, a photo caught her attention. Her father, Robert, next to Frank Miller, both smiling in front of a conservation project. On the back, a date and a phrase: the last day of the true partnership. Meanwhile, journalist Peter Adams was receiving an unexpected visit from Anthony the fisherman. "Son, there are things only the waters of the Everglades know," the old man said, handing him a rusty flash drive. "Frank gave me this before leaving. Said it was a life insurance." In the city, Robert Morrison was meeting with international businessmen in his mirrored office. "The New Waters Project will revolutionize agribusiness in the region," he assured, presenting digital maps of a complex irrigation system. What the investors didn't see were the areas marked in red, natural sanctuaries that would be sacrificed. Helen, watching the rain from the lodge window, decided it was time to reveal her part in the story. She called Michael for a talk. "Frank wasn't just a biologist passionate about the Everglades," she began, her voice laden with emotion. "He was about to expose a scheme that involved the diversion of water resources and the destruction of protected habitats." The next day, during an expedition to document a family of otters, Michael and Claire found something disturbing: a secretly demarcated area with camouflaged measurement equipment in the vegetation. Upon closer investigation, they discovered that the devices belonged to a shell company linked to Robert's group. Julia, unable to bear the weight of secrets any longer, sought out Claire at the veterinary clinic where she worked. "I need to tell you something about the day your father disappeared," she said, her hands trembling as she held a cup of coffee. "My father was with him that morning. I overheard an argument." Peter, analyzing the data from Anthony's flash drive, began to put together a frightening puzzle. The documents revealed a 15-year plan to completely transform the hydrography of the Everglades, benefiting only a small group of powerful farmers. At the lodge, Michael found another clue in Frank's diary, coordinates pointing to a remote island in the heart of the Everglades. Together with Claire, he decided to organize an expedition there, even knowing the risks. "My father always said that some truths need to come to light, like the water lilies that emerge from the dark waters," Claire said, preparing the boat. What they didn't know was that they were being watched. From his office, Robert watched through hidden security cameras while making a call. "They're going to the island. We need to act now." That night, as the Everglades prepared for another storm, different characters in this complex plot were making decisions that would change their lives forever. Helen was writing a revealing letter. Julia was copying incriminating documents from her father's computer. Peter was preparing his most important report, and Anthony was watching the river, whispering ancient Everglades prayers. Michael and Claire, navigating under a heavy sky, couldn't imagine that the island held not only answers about the past, but also the keys to the future of the Everglades. And as the boat cut through the dark waters, lightning illuminated the horizon, as if nature itself wanted to reveal its deepest secrets. Dawn found Michael and Claire approaching the mysterious island. The morning mist created an almost mystical scenario, with herons and woodstorks flying over the calm waters. As they disembarked, they discovered something unexpected: remains of an old research camp with abandoned scientific equipment and notebooks protected in waterproof containers. "This was my father's secret laboratory," Claire whispered, recognizing Frank's meticulous organization. Among the belongings, they found an old laptop, carefully wrapped in plastic and hidden under a false wooden base. Meanwhile, in the city, Julia was facing a disturbing discovery in her father's archives. Documents revealed that the New Waters Project wasn't just an irrigation plan, but part of a larger strategy to control all water resources in the region, irreversibly altering the Everglades ecosystem. Helen, at the lodge, was receiving an unexpected visit from George Sanders, the politician. "You know there's still time to do things the right way," he said, with a veiled threat in his smooth voice. "It would be a shame if your lodge faced problems with environmental inspection." Peter, who had just won an International Environmental Journalism Award, was preparing a documentary about the transformation of the Everglades. "The story didn't end that night on the island," he narrated. "In fact, it was just the beginning of something much bigger." On the island, Michael and Claire were making a crucial discovery when they turned on the laptop. Frank had meticulously documented all the irregularities he had found, including photos, videos, and GPS coordinates of areas where springs were being secretly diverted. Even more impressive, there were records of recorded meetings between Robert Morrison and foreign investors, openly discussing the planned destruction of protected areas. "My father knew everything," Claire murmured, her hands trembling as she went through the files. He was gathering evidence for an international complaint. In Robert's office, the businessman was receiving news about the expedition to the island. In a fit of rage, he knocked objects off his desk. "That island should have been cleaned years ago," he shouted into the phone. "Gather the security team. No one leaves there with any information." Julia, overhearing her father's conversation, made a brave decision. She called Claire. "You need to get out of there now. My father is sending people to the island. It's no longer a matter of hiding information. He's completely out of control." Anthony, noticing strange movements on the river, began lighting fires at strategic points along the banks, an ancient code among fishermen to signal danger. Helen, understanding the signal, quickly contacted environmental authorities she trusted in Washington. On the island, Michael and Claire were working frantically to copy all the files when they heard the sound of engines approaching. "We have company," Michael warned, storing the equipment. Claire, however, was determined. I'm not leaving here without the evidence my father risked his life to gather. The sun was beginning to set over the Everglades, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, while a race against time unfolded on the small island. On one side, Michael and Claire fighting to preserve the truth discovered by Frank. On the other, Robert's men approaching with clear orders to recover or destroy any evidence. Peter, receiving information from his sources, was running to the regional police station with a complete dossier. Julia, torn between family loyalty and justice, was driving at high speed to the island, determined to prevent a tragedy. Helen, at her lodge, was holding a ham radio, coordinating with Anthony a network of fishermen to protect escape routes along the river. The Everglades, majestic and imposing, silently witnessed the unfolding of that story, as the sun plunged into the horizon and the first stars began to dot the sky. The truth, like the waters of the Everglades, was about to find its way, no matter how many obstacles tried to contain it. The Everglades twilight transformed the waters into a golden mirror as three powerful boats approached the island. Michael and Claire, hidden among the dense vegetation, watched Robert's men disembark, equipped with flashlights and communication radios. "We need to split the evidence," Claire whispered, handing Michael a memory card. "If something happens to one of us, the other needs to get out of here." Her green eyes, so similar to her father's, shone with fierce determination. On the dirt road leading to the nearest port, Julia was driving her pickup truck as if her life depended on it. Beside her, in the passenger seat, Peter was frantically typing on his laptop, sending copies of the documents to various journalists and international environmental organizations. Helen, in a moment of courage, decided to reveal her last secret. In a call to Claire, she confessed, "Your father didn't disappear on that expedition. He was forced to stay away to protect us. He's alive, sweetheart, hidden in a refuge in the Bahamas." On the island, the tension was increasing. Robert's men were getting closer and closer to the old camp. Michael and Claire separated, each going in a different direction, keeping in touch through discreet sound signals that mimicked nocturnal birds, a trick Claire had learned from the fishermen. Meanwhile, Anthony was mobilizing a silent support network. Dozens of small fishing boats began to circulate in the vicinity of the island, apparently in their normal routine, but ready to act at the first signal. In the luxurious office in the city, Robert received an unexpected call. "The information has already leaked, Morrison. It's on all international servers." It was George Sanders, the politician, abandoning the sinking ship. "I'm out of this, and I suggest you find an honorable way out too." On the island, one of the men found the laptop. Just as he was about to destroy it, a familiar voice stopped him. "Put that flashlight down, Dad." It was Julia, who had arrived silently in a small boat. Robert, who had just disembarked on the island, was paralyzed to see his daughter. "Are you really going to destroy everything Uncle Frank fought to protect?" Julia asked, her voice choked. "The same Frank who taught me to swim, who showed me my first baby alligator, who trusted you." The moment of tension was interrupted by a thunderous sound. Powerful spotlights illuminated the island. Federal police and EPA helicopters were flying over the area, while environmental police boats emerged from the darkness, completely surrounding the island. Peter, who had alerted the authorities, watched everything from a nearby boat, documenting every moment. Helen, arriving in a small boat with Anthony, brought with her a surprise that would change everything. Frank Miller, the man now with graying hair but still with the same intense green eyes, stepped off the boat. Claire, seeing her father for the first time in 15 years, felt her legs weaken. Michael supported her, witnessing the moment when past and present met in the waters of the Everglades. "It's over, Robert," Frank said, his voice calm but firm. "We're not going to let them destroy what nature took millions of years to create." Robert, seeing himself surrounded not only by authorities, but also by the truth he had tried to hide for so long, lowered his shoulders in defeat. Julia approached her father, holding his hand. "There's still time to do the right thing, Dad. There always is." Under the starry sky of the Everglades, as the authorities began their work, a new story was beginning to be written. Michael observed Claire embracing her father, the river waters reflecting the glow of the stars, silent witnesses that some bonds, like those of nature, can never truly be broken. The morning after the confrontation on the island, the Everglades seemed to breathe differently. The rising sun illuminated Blue Jay Lodge, where Frank, after 15 years, was having coffee on the same porch he had helped build. Helen served coffee with trembling hands, still adapting to the presence of the man she had never stopped loving. "The Everglades have changed a lot," Frank commented, observing the horizon, "but its essence remains the same." Claire, sitting next to her father, absorbed every word, every gesture, trying to make up for lost time. Michael watched them discreetly, finally understanding all the pieces of the puzzle. In the city, the federal police operation was gaining larger proportions. The Morrison Group office was cordoned off and dozens of computers were being seized. Julia, demonstrating a strength she didn't know she possessed, was cooperating with the authorities, providing crucial documents and information. Peter was preparing his series of reports, now with an even more impressive angle. 15 years of silence, the story of the Everglades Guardian. His words were beginning to echo in international newspapers, drawing attention to the importance of preserving the Everglades ecosystem. At the end of the afternoon, an unusual meeting was taking place at the lodge. Representatives of international environmental organizations, who had secretly followed the case for years, were arriving to meet Frank and hear his complete story. Among them was Diana Martinez, a renowned environmental activist who had helped keep Frank safe during his exile. "What happened here is not just a story of corruption," Diana explained to those present. "It's a warning about how greed can threaten one of the most important ecosystems on the planet." Meanwhile, on the riverbanks, Anthony gathered other fishermen for a discreet celebration. Lighting candles in small gourds that floated on the waters, they thanked in their own way for the protection of the Everglades. Michael, invited to the ceremony, learned that true preservation was born from the love of those people for their land. Claire and Frank walked through the property, rediscovering each other. "During all this time," he revealed, "I kept a diary about all the species I encountered in the Bahamas. I never stopped being a biologist. I never stopped being your father." At the police station, Robert Morrison was giving a long statement. His confession, motivated in part by Julia's unconditional support, was beginning to reveal a much larger scheme, involving politicians and businessmen from several states. George Sanders, trying to get ahead, was seeking plea bargain agreements. Helen, organizing old photographs with Frank, found the image that Michael had discovered weeks ago. "Some stories need to be preserved," she said, deciding to create a memorial at the lodge, telling not only their family history, but the struggle for the preservation of the Everglades. At night, a gentle rain fell over the region. On the lodge's porch, Michael worked on his laptop, transforming his scientific notes into something bigger, a preservation project that would unite academic research and traditional knowledge of the fishermen. Claire approached, bringing 2 cups of tea. "You know," she said, sitting next to him, "for years I thought the Everglades had taken my father. Now I understand that it was he who gave himself up to protect it." Julia arrived at the lodge later, carrying boxes of documents. Her decision to transform the family properties into private environmental reserves marked the beginning of a new era. "I'm going to need a lot of technical support," she said, looking meaningfully at Michael and Claire. Frank, observing the new generation take on the responsibility for preserving the Everglades, felt that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The waters that once forced him to leave now witnessed his return, bringing with them not only submerged truths, but also hope for the future. The Everglades, in its millennial wisdom, was beginning another cycle of renewal. The water lilies opened their flowers under the moonlight, while new guardians prepared to protect its secrets and beauties, now with the strength of truth and justice on their side. 3 months after the events on the island, Blue Jay Lodge had transformed into a reference center for researchers and environmentalists. Helen, with Frank's support, expanded the facilities to include a small research laboratory and a wildlife rehabilitation center. Claire took over the coordination of the conservation project, working side by side with Michael. The professional partnership had naturally evolved into something deeper, although both kept it discreet, focused on their mission to protect the Everglades. The monitoring of Florida panthers showed a 30% increase in the local population, Michael explained during a presentation to international investors. Claire added, "And that's just the beginning. With the springs protected, the entire ecosystem is recovering." Julia surprised everyone with her dedication to the environmental cause. she transformed the former headquarters of the Morrison Group into an environmental research institute, the Everglades Waters Institute. Her father, Robert, collaborating with Justice, began a process of redemption, providing crucial information to dismantle other illegal operations in the region. Peter, now internationally recognized for his reports, established an environmental journalism center in the region. "Truth is like the waters of the Everglades," he would say in his lectures. "It always finds its way." On a particularly significant afternoon, Frank gathered everyone on the lodge's porch. "I found this in my things in the Bahamas," he said, showing an old notebook. "They're notes about a species of orchid I discovered, but never got to publish." Michael and Claire exchanged glances, understanding the symbolism of that moment. Anthony, who continued to be the eyes and ears of the Everglades, created a network of environmental monitors formed by fishermen. Their traditional knowledge, finally valued, became a fundamental part of conservation projects. Helen and Frank, rebuilding their interrupted love story, decided to officialize their union in a simple ceremony on the riverbank. "Some waits are worth it," Helen said as they watched a pair of wood storks flying over the site. The project developed by Michael began to bear unexpected fruits. His monitoring techniques, combining modern technology with traditional wisdom, attracted the attention of conservationists from other American biomes. "It's amazing how everything connects," Claire reflected during a night expedition with Michael. "My father's struggle, your work, Julia's transformation, Anthony's resistance, each contributing in their own way to protect this place." Diana Martinez returned to the Everglades, this time bringing a proposal from UNESCO to transform the region into a special preservation area with international status. "What happened here is an example for the world," she declared during the project presentation. The old facilities used to divert the springs were transformed into wildlife observation points. Julia, in a symbolic decision, used personal resources to finance the recovery of degraded areas. Frank, now a visiting professor at universities in the region, shared his experience with young researchers. "The Everglades doesn't need heroes," he would say. "It needs people who love and respect it." On a starry night, Michael found Claire alone in the laboratory, analyzing data. "Did you know that it was right here that my father made his last notes before leaving?" she said with tears in her eyes. Michael held her hand, understanding the weight of that moment. The Everglades, in its grandeur, continued its eternal cycle of flood and ebb. But now, under the protection of a new generation of guardians, its waters flowed more freely, its species thrived more safely, and its secrets were preserved with more love and respect. The story of struggle, separation, and reunion of the Miller family had become a symbol of resistance and hope. Like the waters that always return, some destinies are inevitable, some truths are imperishable, and some loves are eternal, like the Everglades itself. A year had passed since the revelations that changed the fate of the Everglades. The sun rose over Blue Jay Lodge, now transformed into the largest research and conservation center in the region. On the main deck, Michael and Claire prepared for a special presentation. "The Everglades Guardians program already has more than 200 volunteers," Claire announced to an international audience. "They are fishermen, researchers, and young people from the region, all united by the same cause." Michael complimented with impressive data on the recovery of the ecosystem. Helen and Frank, seated in the front row, exchanged proud glances. Their love, reborn from the waters of time, had inspired a new generation. The lodge, once a simple refuge, had become a symbol of resistance and renewal. Julia, now executive director of the Everglades Waters Institute, was revolutionizing the concept of sustainable companies in the region. "Development and preservation can go hand in hand," she explained in a video conference with foreign investors. Her work of transforming the family's former properties into nature reserves served as a model for other entrepreneurs. Peter, who had just won an International Environmental Journalism Award, was preparing a documentary about the transformation of the Everglades. "The story didn't end that night on the island," he narrated. "In fact, it was just the beginning of something much bigger." Anthony, recognized as the chief guardian of the project, trained young fishermen in traditional techniques of navigation and identification of fauna and flora. His ancestral knowledge, once neglected, was now a fundamental part of the curriculum for training new researchers. On a special afternoon, Claire and Michael were navigating the river when they found something extraordinary, a new species of orchid, exactly where Frank had made his last notes before exile. "It's as if the Everglades wanted to tell us that there's always something new to discover," Claire whispered, moved. The ceremony recognizing the region as a natural heritage of humanity by UNESCO brought together authorities from around the world. Diana Martinez, now a permanent representative of the organization in the United States, highlighted how Frank's story had inspired changes in global environmental policies. "The Everglades taught us that some treasures cannot be measured in money," Frank spoke at the occasion. "They are measured in preserved lives in clear waters, in stories that perpetuate through generations." Helen, fulfilling an old dream, inaugurated the Everglades Memorial inside the lodge. There, photos, documents, and objects told not only the story of her family, but of all those who fought to preserve that natural sanctuary. Michael and Claire finally made their relationship official in a simple ceremony on the riverbank, at the same place where Frank and Helen had renewed their vows months before. "Our love was born from the fight for the Everglades," Claire said in her vows, "and to it will always be dedicated." The Spring Recovery Project, led by Julia, was beginning to show surprising results. Species that had not been seen for decades were returning, as if responding to the call of their ancestral waters. Robert, serving his sentence in a semi-open regime, dedicated himself to lecturing entrepreneurs about the real costs of environmental destruction. His story of repentance and redemption had become a powerful warning about the consequences of greed. In the last scene of Peter's documentary, an aerial image showed the Everglades at sunset, its waters reflecting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Frank's voice narrated, "The Everglades is more than an ecosystem. It's a teacher. It teaches us about cycles, about renewal, about the strength of truth and the power of love. Its waters carry stories, its lands hold secrets, and its future depends on each one of us." And so, under the infinite sky of the Everglades, a new era began. An era of awareness, preservation, and harmony between man and nature. The waters would continue their eternal cycle, now protected by guardians who understood that preserving the Everglades was preserving life itself.